Thanks for tuning back in to Replatform TV. It's myself and Paul as always, and today we are going to guide you through tips on improving e-commerce checkout experience. So how flexible the flow and design of your checkout is will depend on your e-commerce platform. For example, if you're using standard Shopify, most stores follow their default flow because it's an established flow. It simplifies the UX there. Each step of your checkout, though, will have an exit rate. So any e-commerce team needs to find ways to reduce the exit rate to improve conversion. So today we're going to give you some of those tips. Before we do, Paul, what do you find are the typical shopper frustrations of e-commerce checkouts?
Yeah, so a few of the ones that I see a lot, say disjointed experience for non-desktop devices, often mobile, but then also tablet, which is often forgotten. Lack of clarity around the overall process. Fields not being localized for specific territories. Confusing fields and payments experience, and then a lack of clarity around things like duties in particular at the moment, and then also tax.
Excellent. With that in mind, let's go through our top 10 tips. So number one for me is enclosed navigation, removing core site navigation that's distracting. So here's the example from Farfetch. You can see that the main site navigation, like all the categories and searches stuff, has been stripped back, a streamlined header for checkout, a progress bar, and straight into the checkout. So easy for the customer to focus on what you want them to. If people want to come back out, you've got things, simple quick links back to main site through logo redirect, for example.
Great. And then my first one is around internationalisation and localisation. So the first piece, and Burberry is a really good example of this, is allowing for users that have essentially got to this stage of the process and then aren't able to ship to their destination. So if you've got a multi-store site, you might find that you've got a rest of world site and a US site, for example, and the rest of world site doesn't then allow you to ship to the US. So if you do need to switch store, which is the scenario that James is showing on the screen, ideally you'd allow the user to retain their basket and then also remain logged in if they're logged in. So Burberry is a really nice example of this. And I think it's kind of the holy grail for the multi-store checkout experience. In addition to that, you've then got localizing fields and labels. So, addresses in different countries are formatted differently. People have different interpretations of different fields. So that needs to be localized for key territories. Address validation and lookup, ensure that's localized. Like some things like postcode lookup don't really work in a lot of countries, for example, and address validation, you need to make sure it's optimized for other territories beyond your primary market. Ensure so provide clarity around global versus local accounts, because that's a big confusion point often as well. So people trying to log in on the wrong store. So try and make that clear around the login process, and also the traffic handling piece pre-checkout is particularly important to that. International payment methods, so ideal, Sofort, Klarna, etc. for some of the key European markets, and then things like Alipay, UnionPay, WeChat Pay, etc. For certain Asian markets. And then lastly, clarity around duties and local currency through the checkout is really important. So duties in particular is a big friction point, especially topical at the moment with Brexit.
Definitely. And whether you are doing estimated duties or you're shipping with duties included, just having that clarity is so critical. So there's no misalignment of expectation. Cool. So that was number two. Number three is guest checkout. It still blows my mind that lots of e-commerce sites don't offer a guest option when there's no reason for them not to do so. Like, don't force people to have to go through registration if they don't want to. Sometimes there are legal reasons. Or there are business models where registration is critical, like membership organizations, that's fine. But if it's a simple e-commerce purchase, get people into checkout, let them buy quickly, give them the opportunity on the order confirmation page to then create an account by telling them what the value add is of adding a password, because that's all it is. But it's a perception thing, so don't slow them down. A good example here, I'm on Glossier, I'm in the checkout, continue as guest, and go agree to terms and conditions, which I never like having to agree to terms and conditions. You don't need to. You can just have a text description there. But I'm going straight in now. I didn't need to add any sign-up details.
One thing that's quite interesting as well around that is sometimes it's worth thinking about. So a lot of sites only do guest checkout, and then they want to do things like loyalty and certain other functionality that really needs an account. And that's something to think about as well, is ultimately, even if you push guest checkout initially, maybe offering or promoting the concept of creating an account. So my next point is trust signals and help generally through the checkout. So there's a lot of examples of this around the internet. AO.com is one that James gave me earlier. And essentially some of the tips here are kind of leverage the kind of icons around payment methods, showcase your kind of SSL certificate, make all of the kind of comms around how someone could get help really clear, try and use like annotations or tooltips to make things clear around anything that is slightly more complex, such as duties or a specific field of the checkout that isn't super straightforward. So just make it easy for someone to kind of understand something they may not understand. And then a test would be whether or not to include live chat. So I've heard conflicting views on this based on what some of our clients have done in the past.
Excellent. So my next point on this is point number 5 is persistent order summary. I'm going to give the example of Tiffany. So this is really useful when, especially on mobile, where you have a small screen, and if people, if you usually get multiple items in a basket, the ability at the top to have a simple bar which people could then expand to show them what's in that order summary, and making sure that the order total is persistently visible just helps reassure people that they know what they're buying and that you've got the right information for them, including the costs that they're going to pay, and keep that persistent throughout the checkout.
Great. And then my next one is some usability considerations. So where you can pre-populate fields, but just be aware of browser conflicts. So this is something to just keep an eye on. I'm sure kind of ops people within the business have flagged issues when they come through, but yeah, lots of our clients have had issues, but where you can, try and make that work and just ensure fields are compatible, etc. Field validation. So if you do have issues with things like email addresses or phone numbers being wrong, try and add a layer of validation. So email is one that is a bit easier these days. Like a lot of the address validation solutions allow for it. And then there are more specific third parties as well. Talked a bit about address lookup and validation, but I've personally found that postcode lookup does work better and is a little bit more accurate if you can do that. But generally, not all markets support that. So very few people use it in the US, for example. So in that, you might want to use validation or lookup. And then site-wide modals, so avoid those in the checkout. So I generally avoid pop-ups in the checkout where you can, unless it's for a very specific purpose, like age verification or something like that. Just in terms of best practice. And then we've got David Austin as an example here of that postcode lookup piece. So this is the Shopify checkout, as you can see. And then if you just scroll down, James. So you can see they've got their lookup there in place of the standard Shopify and some of the validation stuff.
Excellent. So number 7 for me is clear payment methods and surfacing fast payment methods up front and not make people go through unnecessary steps. You can see this in the default Shopify checkout where you can jump straight into fast payment options. So you got Google Pay and PayPal. Another example I've got, and the UX isn't beautiful on this because of the sheer competition of all of these buttons. But what it is doing is it's showing at basket stage that PayPal and PayPal Credit are available and you can go through a faster checkout. So really think about what payment options are important to your customers, which ones are worth surfacing, how early in the journey can you surface it to try and speed up checkout completion.
Great. And then my next one is the order confirmation page. So we don't have an example of this because we didn't make a purchase. But I really like the map, which a lot of Shopify sites do, showing kind of where the product is at that point, and then use it, just a bit of clarity. You can promote account creation, which I touched on earlier. And then generally, I think the order confirmation page is often like the most underutilized real estate on an e-com site. So lots more businesses are currently doing product recommendations. And then they're allowing people to add items to their order. So they usually have a window for order editing, for example. So that's a really common trait at the moment, or something that's happening a lot more. And then another one is start to promote social sharing of content. So if you're doing curated Instagram on your PDPs or across the site, just generally start to share a hashtag. If you've got any incentives around that kind of stuff, or even another one would be like refer a friend benefits. That's all kind of good real estate for that type of content.
Fantastic. my final one, so point 9 is mobile UX, and I'm not going to show an example. It's just simple, good practice. So it's a good example is making sure that you assign the right keyboard to the right input field. So if somebody is inputting a number, make sure the numerical keyboard's shown. If they're inputting an email, the email address keyboard is shown. Speed up people's ability to enter information into your fields correctly. Control input field sizes, make them accessible, mark them up so anybody who is using, who's got accessibility issues, who's going to your site, is able to tab through and understand what field they're currently looking at. Make CTA, call to action buttons appropriate sizing. Set minimums, target areas that makes it actually usable for people who are trying to press on those buttons on your site. And minimize data fields. So don't add in loads of additional data fields because you think it might be useful to capture that information. Speed up people's checkouts and look to capture additional information later on, either on an order confirmation page or through follow-up emails. So just keep it as simple as possible. And a good example, Patagonia, you go into the checkout, all the data fields open up appropriate keyboards.
Great. And then my last one is more kind of like, I guess, progression and optimization. So depending on which platform you're on, some of this stuff might be more relevant. But things like, there are third-party checkouts to kind of simplify or, optimize what might not be a particularly great flow or approach. So Fast is getting a lot more popular at the moment. They've got a lot of money behind them. People still use Klarna checkout a lot, particularly in Scandinavia, which can be a good option. And there's various other ones out there, but that's something to maybe be aware of, particularly if you're on more of a legacy platform. Headless checkouts are getting a lot more popular, and people are talking about it a lot more. So essentially just creating a really streamlined, fast, lean checkout. In the same way you would with a normal headless approach. Local checkouts for key markets. So Asia is the obvious one. So with all of the kind of restrictions around the firewall, so local checkouts and really well optimized third-party checkouts can work really well. And there's various other ones for kind of Middle East and other territories. And then lastly, you've got solutions like Globally or Flow for kind of that broader international piece. So some of the appeal with Globally is more around the fulfillment side, but they do have a checkout which is kind of natively localized based on IP and all of that kind of stuff. Just a few things you could potentially look at to optimize if you're struggling.
Excellent. So that is our fast track 10 tips for checkout improvements. So let's distill it. What will be your number one takeaway for our watchers, Paul?
Yeah, so I guess, to be honest, it's a bit of a combination of 2 or 3 of them, but just really keep things super simple, streamlined, focus on speed, real kind of usability around field. And I always use Shopify's checkout as an example, just because they've got 1.5 million customers on it, and they obviously spend a lot of time optimizing it. And then there's equally there's a lot of bigger brands that better allow for things like click and collect and some of the more complex order flows. And then the Baymard research documents are still pretty good, so I don't think they've been updated for a while, but they're still really useful in terms of collating what other brands are doing and some of the key kind of usability trends.
Cool. Yeah, mine is very similar. It's be minimalist. Start with the simplest possible checkout you ever can. Only the essential elements. Remove anything unnecessary, like just CRM data capture, and only add things back in judiciously through proper testing and measurement of what impact adding extra functionality into your checkout does. So thanks as always to everybody for listening and watching us. Let us know how you could use these insights to improve your checkout. Please add comments, share with anyone else you think are interested. And if you did like it, give us a thumbs up. It's always useful to know what content people like the most. So thanks again for listening. And if you haven't already, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. For more information on this topic, head over to replatform.fm for our audio podcasts. To discuss a project, or if you'd like to chat about any of the topics covered in this episode in more detail, please reach out to myself, James Gurd, or my co-host Paul Rogers via LinkedIn and Twitter. Thanks again for listening, and keep your ears peeled for the next episode.